Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. On a previous video, we spoke about the anatomy of an album. There we spoke about not only the cover and the sleeve, but as well as inserts and liner notes. So you know how to walk the walk, but do you know how to talk the talk of the other element we didn't speak about in the album, which is the vinyl record itself? Yes, that little black round disc. We're going to talk about that today. First of all, why is it called vinyl? Where did that term come from? Well, a record is made up of polyvinyl chloride. From now on, we'll call that PVC. Yes, it's the PVC that they use in plumbing. PVC is made from ethylene, which is a crude oil product, as well as chlorine. Vinyl records were first introduced in 1948 with the backing of Columbia Records. Prior to this time, shellac records were used. They were played at 78 RPM, and they had, however, only a capacity of approximately 5 minutes per side, which limited the type of music that you can listen to, so orchestrated pieces were difficult to listen to. The other downside was shellac was very fragile. If you dropped it, it would shatter in hundreds of pieces. When vinyl records were first introduced, they were 12 inches in size, and they played at 33 1/3 RPM. Now, this allowed up to 21 minutes of music per side. So a year after the 33 1/3 12-inch vinyl record was introduced, the 45 was introduced. The 45 RPM record had approximately 4 to 5 minutes per side, so you can have approximately one song per side. The 33 1/3 became known as the LP, standing for long play, and the 45 became known as the EP, or extended play. One of the advantages of the 45, it was portable and thus very popular amongst teens, where they would take them to parties as well as trade amongst themselves. So how do we produce a vinyl record? Well, the first step is to make a lacquer. So what are lacquers? Well, lacquers are aluminum discs coated with nitrocellulose. Now, this gives the aluminum disc a very shiny coating. However, it is rather flammable. It's interesting to note that lacquers are only made at 2 places in the entire world. One is in California at the Apollo Transco factory, and the second is in Japan at the MDC factory. Why is this a problem? Well, as we said, lacquers are highly flammable. And in February of 2020, a fire broke out at the Apollo Transco factory. It destroyed the entire building and all the contents were lost. At first, it was said that approximately 80% of all lacquers were made at this plant. However, this is likely an overestimation. So how do you keep up with the increased demand for lacquers? Well, the MDC plant can focus only on their 14-inch lacquers. 14-inch lacquers will produce 12-inch vinyl albums. However, this would be at the expense of the 12 and 10-inch lacquers producing the 10-inch and 7-inch vinyl records. Additionally, because of the increasing demand, 2 European companies had said that they are going to step up and start producing lacquers as well. Other people have suggested rebuilding the Apollo Transco factory. However, this is not so easy, as there are much more strict environmental codes in California, which may prevent the rebuilding of the facility. So getting back to how vinyl is made, the first step is using a lacquer and then have a cutting lathe with a sapphire cutting head. This would then produce a single continuous groove all the way throughout the process. After the entire groove is cut through the lacquer, it is inspected using microscopes to look for any flaws and determine if the lacquer is a keeper or if it is destroyed. However, it should be noted that lacquers are fragile and you cannot use a lacquer to stamp out records. So what has to happen is a metal stamper has to be created from the original lacquer. So to be able to create the metal stamper, the lacquer is sprayed with tin chloride as well as liquid silver. Then it is dipped into a nickel bath. While in the nickel bath, an electric charge is used to fuse these metals together to cause a more rigid structure. This structure is then carefully removed from the lacquer, and this is what's used as the stamper. Once the final metal stamper is produced and approved for pressing records, the next step is actually pressing the vinyl. The next step in vinyl records is using black polyvinyl chloride pellets, which are then liquefied and produce a hot rubbery patty. This patty is called a biscuit. In the next step, labels are placed both above and below the biscuit, and then approximately 100 tons of pressure at 200 degrees Celsius is applied to produce a vinyl record. After the vinyl record comes out of the press, it is quickly cooled, which allows the vinyl to solidify as well as bond the label to the vinyl. Okay, so let's get down to the parts of the vinyl record itself. Now, when you put down your phono cartridge on the beginning of an album, that actually has a name. It's called the run-in groove. The run-in groove term came about in the 1950s by a music writer. After the run-in groove, you have the music itself, the multiple tracks on the vinyl record. Now, we talked about mono and stereo in the past, but I didn't go into that the grooves are actually different on a mono and a stereo record. So on a mono record, what happens is lateral cuts are made by a single head, and this has only a horizontal component. However, in stereo records, two heads are used, and not only does it have horizontal component laterally, it also has a vertical component. Now, along the walls of the stereo cut are the right and left channels. This has different types of audio signal within each channel, and the two channels are approximately 45 degrees one to the other. So now you've listened to side one of the album, and then the phono cartridge goes out into what's called, obviously, if there's a run-in groove, the run-out groove. The run-out groove is the region between the end of the music and the central label. This area in the run-out groove is also known as dead wax. However, as most of you know, in the region of the dead wax, there is some information present. Collectors value this information. This information is known as the matrix number or the matrix code. So the matrix number can be both stamped or more commonly handwritten on the inside portion of the album. There is a main portion which is the code of the album to identify the album. We see that on the album cover as well. So why is these numbers important? Well, collectors use this to figure out the value of a record. They're looking for first pressings. So you would think collectors are looking for the number 1 or the number A after the reference number of the vinyl record. However, although this is partially true, there's more to the story, and you can find yourself in a perilous situation if you don't do a little bit more research. So why is a 1A not a first pressing? Well, it probably is a first pressing, but there are more first pressings than just looking for 1A. An example of this can be found in the pressings of Columbia Records. To read more fully about this, you can go to the website by Michael Fremer. He runs a website called Analog Planet, and this website is all analog. It not only talks about vinyl records, it also talks about turntables, phono cartridges, and phono preamps, amongst other things. In one feature that he talks about in 2017 about Columbia Records, he had a cutting engineer who worked for the label named Phil Brown. Phil Brown worked for Columbia Records in the 1970s, and he had some interesting information to share. Columbia Record had three main pressing plants. One was in Pitman, New Jersey, one was in Terre Haute, Indiana, and the third was on the West Coast in Santa Maria, California. So what would happen is 2 lacquers would go to each of these pressing plants on a major release, and that's how the records were pressed. So why do they send 2 lacquers to each facility? Well, lacquers are fragile, and if one would break or get misplaced, you still have the second lacquer to press records with. So the 2 lacquers in New Jersey may be lacquer A and B, those in Indiana are C and D, and those in California would be E and F. So those letters would all signify a first pressing. So it's not only A, it could be B, C, D, E, and F as well. Now, what is the number? The number refers to as the mix that they were using on the tape. So a number 1 means that that was the original mix, that's what they're using. If you see a number 2, it doesn't mean that this is a second pressing. Number 2 means that there was something changed in the record either by the artist or the engineer because there was a mistake or a new take was used, and therefore it would be a number 2. So you can have 2A or 2F still be a first pressing. So if you're a collector of Columbia vinyl and looking for just the letters 1A, you're going to be missing out on a lot of first pressings. And I've always had that question. I have some albums from Columbia that on one side said 1A and on the second side it said 1B. At first I said, well, that just means side A and side B. Well, no, what happens is that plant, let's say the New Jersey plant, has lacquer A and B. So they printed A on the first side and they use lacquer B to make the imprint on side 2. So you may see actually the pressing plant on Columbia Records etched into the dead wax area. It would say P for Pittman, TH for Terre Haute, and SA for Santa Maria. To do further reading about this, you can go to the analogplanet.com website and look at the 3/21/17 posting entitled Cracking the Columbia Records Code, written by Michael Fremer. However, many of you may have noticed that there are sometimes words written or graphics placed other than numbers and letters, and you would be right. This all started in the 1960s with a mastering engineer by the name of George Peckham. He used to put his name there in code as Porky or a pork prime cut. However, in the 1970s and 80s, as this began catching on, artists started using this area to put hidden messages. One such example can be seen in the London Calling album by The Clash from 1979. This was a double LP, so on each side of the record a different word was etched. One would say tear, the other one would say the other one would say wall, and the final one would say down for the message, tear the walls down. More recently, on Record Store Day in 2017, the Smiths released a 7-inch record with the A side being called The Boy with the Thorn in His Side. Some of you may know this already, although in 2017 their message was Trump will kill America. I kid you not, you can look that up and you'll find it. So you're thinking, you've talked about the black vinyl records, but today we see all sorts of colors. What's going on with that? As I said originally, PVC is a clear substance and a black carbon is added in those pellets to cause it to be a black color. Now, in the early days of making colored vinyl records, say in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s, color records were noted by collectors to be inferior sound quality. So many of these were not purchased, especially by me. I never bought any of those because I knew the sound wasn't that good. However, today that's not the case. The technology has improved and colored vinyl is actually more sought after today. So the color vinyl is made at the beginning of the process where PVC is not mixed with black carbon, but with other colored dyes to form these colored vinyl albums. As I said prior, the black carbon will strengthen the PVC, and the colored vinyl, however, doesn't do this as well as black vinyl, so these albums are slightly more fragile. There are still exceptions to the rule with colored vinyl. There are still some of poor quality. So which ones of poor quality sound should you stay away from? Well, anything that's clear vinyl, because that would be PVC without any sort of added color to strengthen the album. So this would be a very fragile vinyl record. Not only that, but picture discs, although collected because they appear to be valuable, are more fragile, and it has a clear coating on the top of the picture, and this is not as well preserved as for other records. Many collectors just buy the discs and keep them and never play them at all. And finally, glow-in-the-dark records also have poor quality sound, so you may want to stay away from those unless you're a collector and you just want to have it in your collection to complete it. We haven't spoken about the weight of the vinyl record. Vinyl records can weigh anywhere from 130 grams up to approximately 200 grams. The difference in the weight of the album will not affect the speed accuracy to any significant degree. When you see the sticker on the album that says 180 gram weight, this does not necessarily mean it's going to be better quality sound. However, the record companies that do produce 180 gram records usually do take extra care and do care about sound quality, so you're more likely to get a better sounding record. What's more important is actually if it's virgin vinyl. This will give better sound quality. Also look to see if they're using the original master tapes. This will also improve the sound quality of your vinyl. Finally, although people don't think about it, the central hole in the middle of a 33 1/3 record, where the spindle would sit, is actually extremely important. If the central hole is offset even a little bit, this would degrade the quality of the sound. What may happen that the phono cartridge may not track properly and the sound will sound off to you. Also, it's possible that the spindle may be so off that the cartridge cannot track the record at all and it would be unplayable. So let's review last video's unknown album. The first unknown album is The Return to Forever featuring Chick Corea, Where Have I Known You Before? Now this album on Polydor came out in 1974. This was the third album by The Return to Forever, and this had a lineup of Chick Corea with bassist Stanley Clarke, drummer Lenny White, and the new member of the band, the guitarist Al Di Meola. As I said on my last video, Chick Corea recently passed away on February 9th of 2021, and he is a multi-Grammy award winning jazz pianist. He has won 23 Grammys, quite a few, and he is nominated for 2 more Grammys on this upcoming award season. Chick Corea is credited as being one of the early pioneers in jazz fusion. This fused both jazz music with rock elements. Earlier in his career, he was a member of the Miles Davis band. Chick Corea, as a member of the Miles Davis band, he participated in the early works of jazz fusion in such albums such as In a Silent Way, which we talked about on the last video, as well as the landmark album Bitches Brew. Chick Corea is considered one of the foremost jazz pianists since the Coltrane era. The second unknown album is Dusty in Memphis, released in 1969 on the Atlantic label. Dusty Springfield is a British pop star. She had many early hits in the 60s, including I Only Want to Be With You and Wishin' and Hopin'. On this album, she wanted to show her soul side because she considered herself what was known as the blue-eyed soul singer. So to be able to get that soulful sound she was looking for, she went to the famous studio in Memphis, Tennessee, where she had studio musicians help her record this album. There's something interesting about this album. Although the album was recorded in full in the Memphis studio, Dusty, after the recording of the album, was not 100% happy with her vocals. She then redubbed them in the New York studios of Atlantic Records, and that's how the album came out, with her overdubs on her vocals, as well as some of the musical orchestral arrangements. Now, Dusty in Memphis, although considered by Rolling Stone magazine one of the greatest albums of all time in their top 500 list, this album did not sell well in 1969. It only reached number 99 on the Billboard Hot 200 albums in the United States. However, it did better in Britain, where it reached number 14. Dusty did go on to have 6 top 20 songs on the Billboard Hot 100, including Son of a Preacher Man, which was on this album, Dusty in Memphis. Dusty was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She is considered one of the most important women in rock music history. Most recently, in 2020, the Library of Congress selected Dusty in Memphis to be preserved in the National Recording Registry. And now this video's unknown album, the first unknown album. Okay, got that? Good. Here's number 2, second unknown album. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, this is Alex with All About Albums. Have a great day, and remember, keep them spinning.